Hello and welcome to the Oil and Gas Workers Association podcast. My name is Matt Cody, president and founder of Oil and Gas Workers Association. Joining us today, Congresswoman Yvette Herrell from New Mexico's 2nd District. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
You have been busy in Washington, D.C. I want to talk, and I told you about this before we started filming. I want to talk about the infrastructure bills that are going through both the House and the Senate. Of course, you're in the House of Representatives. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing.
Well, sadly, what I'm seeing, the truth is, it's one thing to, hate a president, not like his policies, the hate for Donald Trump is amazing, but it's quite another, to watch them dismantle our nation. And that's exactly what's happening. The policies coming through one by one, they're taking away all the good policies that President Trump put into effect. And I could name a litany. I mean, starting with the border, starting with the regulations, funding for our military. The list goes on and on. And so it's very sad because at the end of the day, the biggest losers are going to be the American people.
Certainly. And in fact, it often seems that a lot of the policies are not, they serve no purpose except to just tear down anything that President Trump did. Is that a lot of what you feel there?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, and I was thinking this in my mind as I was watching things happen very quickly, but I am convinced because you're looking at things now like waters of the U.S. I mean, President Trump, his administration dealt with that. We found good compromise. It was working. Another good one is the Endangered Species Act. Under the Trump administration, 17 species were removed from the list. And now the Biden administration is bringing all that back. And they're saying they're not going to differentiate between endangered and threatened. And it's just more and more concern and uncertainty for our ag operations, for our oil and gas, for the American business owner. It doesn't make sense that they're doing all these things that are so harmful to the American people.
A lot of the policies, they've blurred the lines. And in fact, I'm glad, obviously, that you brought up oil and gas policies. Last week, Congress voted along party lines to go back to the Obama era EPA regulations that really hurt American producers and cost a lot of Americans our jobs. President Trump rolled back a lot of the overzealous and burdensome regulations on producers. What can we expect from these from this return to the young glory days?
Yeah, exactly. And I spoke on this on the House floor about this methane rule. And really, at the end of the day, it's their zeal for this green new energy that honestly, America is not ready for it. We do not have the infrastructure in place. We do not have a possibility of going all new green and getting rid of the oil and gas jobs, the fossil fuels. They're not even thinking that way. It just like when they did the executive order to get rid of the Keystone pipeline, there wasn't a backup plan, just all that work, all that money, all of that planning and development, and then just out the window. And so what they're doing is they're pushing this Green New Deal through everything. In fact, the infrastructure bill is full. In fact, I'll just give you some examples. This is on the Democrat bill on the House side. There's $100 billion on project delays. 1 out of every $2 will be spent on Green New Deal mandates. I mean, let me tell you, it's crazy. There's $276 billion just on the mandates themselves, not to mention the others that they're putting in terms of a commission and all these things trying to go green. And what's sad is the end users are going to be paying for this. What I mean by that is, our lower income earners, this is going to be a hit on their utility bills for electricity. I mean, it's going to be a hit on them for a lot of things, how much they pay to put gas in their cars, how they pay their utility bills. And we're hurting the very people that they're professing to help. But it is this zeal, they are hell-bent on getting this Green New Deal through, and they are doing it through every piece of legislation that's coming through that could be meaningful and helpful for the American people.
And Speaker Pelosi said last week, there ain't going to be no bipartisan bill unless we have a bigger reconciliation bill. She seems hell-bent on pushing her green energy infrastructure bill and welfare to poorly run states.
That's it. And let's be very clear, because this is what I think is very important. The key takeaway the American people need to understand: the titles of these bills, they sound great. What's in the bill is completely devastating. I mean, she's got in the bill that she wants through, it has health care increases, it's got climate change issues, it's got social engineering, so that we can move even further into this green new energy. It's got a huge tax increase in it, because none of this is going to be free. And they keep saying they're not going to tax the American people. They have no other way to pay for these bills that they are trying to get passed without raising taxes on people. And that's across the board. It'll be small businesses, it'll be corporate income tax, the death tax. I mean, just on and on. And so it's not really fair for her to say that she's got, these great ideas and these bills that'll help Americans, when at the end of the day, they're actually going to be hurting Americans. But again, it is just this zeal for pushing this Green New Deal, which sadly, 5 years ago, I think everybody would have thought this is the dumbest thing we've ever heard of, that will never go. And now here we are, face to face with this. To me, is what it looks like when you have people in Congress that have never run a business, have no idea the cost of doing business. In fact, the closest thing they have to business experience is putting a credit card number in Amazon.com and ordering something offline. They do not understand the sheer cost of doing business, and yet they're piling these mandates on top of the backs of our small businesses, which they are the backbone of our economy.
One great example of that is the representative from New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who once said that unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. I don't understand how people like that are looked up to as role models. And I don't know. What is it like working with her in Congress?
She's, you know what, when she has her talking points written down for her, great, because I sit on the oversight committee with her. Once she's off script, she's a complete disaster. I mean, I don't know if you saw it over the weekend, she was mad at one of the Republicans that, called her a communist and not doesn't love America. And her response was, oh, well, I'm taller than she is. It's like, what is that? I mean, that's her response. And that's what we're dealing with. And I think, and I've said this a lot over the last couple of years, I think the foundation of our nation started crumbling a little bit when we took God out of schools, and then we got government into raising our kids instead of allowing families and parents to raise their kids. And this, to me, is what it looks like when it's everybody gets a ribbon. There's no timeout. There's no personal responsibility. Now we've got these people that just have these crazy ideas that somehow think they're great, that are actually harmful. And they're the ones making decisions that you and I have to live with every single day.
Absolutely. And so often we have people who are out of touch with reality. You have always represented the people of New Mexico well. You started in the state legislature. You mentioned raising minimum wage and some of the other policies that really will hurt American workers. In fact, in New Mexico, people there lobbied for a raised minimum wage. They got it. And then employers were forced to cut jobs, raise prices, reduce hours, reduce benefits, and people don't understand that it, like socialism, is never going to work.
That's exactly right. And here's the saddest thing of all. In New Mexico, we lost so many businesses, closed their doors permanently because of the COVID. And then here we are, the small ones trying to hang on now that we're starting to open back up again. And number one, the mandates that they're being dealt with, but plus we're incentivizing people to sit on the couch and not go back to work because this is their idea of a thriving economy. And we're actually pushing further into the lane of socialism, distribution of wealth, and it's hurting our small businesses. And then people complain because the theater is not open or certain restaurants aren't open, or it takes 2 hours to get a table at, whatever establishment you want to go to. Why? Because we're making it harder for the American business owner to actually open their doors and be successful. And we're putting more of an impact on pushing through these dangerous policies like the Green New Deal and this infrastructure and all these things that actually cost the taxpayers more money.
Now, under the Green New Deal and President Biden and Vice President Harris's clean energy plans, their promise was to create 10 million clean energy jobs. I want to tie that to the Biden border crisis. You invited Vice President Harris to come tour the border and see the true magnitude of what's going on down there. She never did accept your invitation. So why don't you please tell us, how bad is it?
It's bad. In fact, she never even had the courtesy to respond. And then, of course, after 93 days, she takes a little trip down to a processing center in the port of entry, which is great, but it was nothing more than a dog and phony show and a photo op. It is a crisis on the border. We're seeing encounters that are going up 180,000 in the month of May, 160,000 in the month of April. I mean, we are seeing such an impact and we're losing our nation because of this open border. And what's so very sad is under the Trump administration, the Remain in Mexico policy worked wonderfully, as well did the Title 42. And Title 42, which was the health order that gave our agents the ability to expel those coming in illegally from Mexico or Canada, they could do a quick process on the border and expel them. And of course, the Biden administration got rid of Remain in Mexico. They talked last week about removing the Title 42. And here's what makes me so mad. If COVID-19, when we all know it's a serious virus, but if it was as serious as the nation would say it was, or our governor, then why in the world would you open the borders, allow all these people to come in, and we're incentivizing people to come here illegally and not do COVID checks? We know that a lot of them have or are exposed to other infectious diseases. So it's okay to let a business shut down their doors forever because of COVID and the mandates of our governor. But it's not okay to want people to stay out of our nation and come through the proper channels. But it is the cost to the American people no one is talking about. I mean, it is in the billions. And I actually said this at a press conference. I said, we're actually laundering money as Americans because we're paying taxes. The government's incentivizing and giving these people money to be here. And then that money is being paid to the cartel. And the cartel are the big winners when it comes to making money and knowing who is coming into our country illegally. It is a total disaster when you have people coming from at least 120 nations coming into our country illegally. And I haven't even started about the drugs, the fentanyl up 680%, apprehension of illegal fentanyl, methamphetamine. Yes. But then the other thing that no one talks about, and we do beat this drum, is New Mexico border is a little bit different in that this isn't all the families that are coming across, with a shirt that says Biden let me in. These are gang members. These are guys that are dressed in camouflage. These are the people that don't want to get caught by the Border Patrol. And even just this morning, Mr. Johnson sent me yet another set of pictures from their game camera of these people coming through, tearing up water lines, pushing livestock off the water, stealing vehicles, tearing down fences. I mean, the property damage alone, not to mention, you can't even live in America and be safe as an American citizen if you live in and around our border, because we will give priority to those coming here illegally instead of the safety of the American people.
Now, another woman who has pushed a clean energy, green energy future, and in fact spoke at the convention, Governor Lujan Grisham, who in 2019 pulled National Guard troops from the border, said there was no illegals crisis, and then 3 months later was in Washington, D.C. begging for money to pay for the illegals crisis. It boggles the mind. Do you think that the Biden-Harris administration is intentionally ignoring the crisis at the border in order to gain more voters eventually?
I absolutely do. I think they are absolutely ignoring this. They know it's a crisis. And in fact, what's sad is we have beat the drum for our industries and for this border crisis. I sent a letter to the governor asking her to put the National Guard troops back on the border, that we needed help. In fact, over 120 of our Border Patrol agents are busy inside that processing center and leaving, the border wide open. She refuses to do that. And in fact, what really makes me laugh, and I just hope the American people see the hypocrisy and the stupidity in all this, Harris actually had the nerve to say that things were improving at the border. She said that the other day after she visited El Paso, and it's kind of like, yeah, they're improving. If you're wanting more and more and more people to come through our border illegally, yes, there is a huge improvement, but they are completely I honestly think they understand it's a huge crisis, but they don't want to admit that it's a crisis. And they know if they start talking about it realistically, they would absolutely have to put some policies back in play to stop, to slow this down. And they just won't do it. And you're right. They see it as voters. We see it as a crisis, national security. I think when we're putting the value of illegals coming to this country illegally over the safety of American citizens, then we certainly have our priorities wrong, and it is all politics. And I called them out. I said, look, it's costly. This is cruel, not only for the children and the women, 1 out of 3 being raped as they come through the transit nations, but it's cowardice for our administration to not admit that we have a problem. But again, it's just dismantling our country and our global standing, and we're weakening America as a whole by not securing our borders.
And when we talk about a humanitarian crisis, we talk about, those who scream for a living wage, but then talk about the lack of available jobs. It just doesn't make any sense to me to keep bringing more people onto a ship that's already getting lower in the water. At what point do we sink this ship?
Yeah. And honestly, the border crisis is truly one of the biggest issues we face because of this onslaught of people, the money that it's costing. And it's not like everybody's coming in and just taking in a job. I mean, we're seeing a huge workforce shortage across the board with every single industry. So this doesn't make sense. But, the people, some of them coming don't even understand what's going on. But who's making the money are the cartels. And in fact, I've been down to the border 4 different times, out to the Johnson Ranch, to the processing centers, down across Columbus, and where people don't understand where that barrier is built, where they left those big gaps. It's like barbed wire fence. I mean, that is the nation's border between a foreign country and America. It doesn't make sense, but we are hamstringing our government. And what no one talks about in Washington, which is very surprising, is when are we ever going to get serious about balancing our budget and truly cutting waste, fraud, and abuse? Because every bill that's coming through, these billions of dollars, on these Green New Deal projects, on these port projects, on climate change, on equality, you just can't even believe what is happening up here. And it's really heartbreaking. I mean, I knew it would be bad when I got here, but to the extent that it is, I think it's surprising to everyone.
President Trump, one of the most pro-American energy independence presidents of my entire lifetime. The only other one I could think of would be President Reagan, pro-America, right? But President Trump, the biggest energy independence president and pro-American worker. I never understood how "Make America Great Again" could turn out to be a racist trope, but they turned everything to be a racist trope. Since he's left, since he is no longer in office, let's put it that way, and returned to the Obama-Biden era policies that really hurt our oil and gas jobs, the influx of migrants into our country. When we kill a whole industry, which is what Democrats have said they aim to do, while foreign countries like China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Venezuela says that they're free of the American oppression. Lots of other foreign countries are going to continue to produce oil and gas. As migrants come here, a large percentage tend to vote Democratic. Are we importing the force that's going to kill the entire country?
Yeah, I think the crisis at the border is very serious, and you nailed it. I mean, what we're doing is we're diluting, the American population with people who will, like you say, vote Democrat most likely, because in that HR 1 Nancy Pelosi pushed, it allowed you could vote. It didn't matter if you were here legally or illegally. I mean, obviously, this is exactly what they're trying to do. But at the same time, what's more worrisome is, we are in the greatest country in the world. And when we start diminishing our global standing, and if we start having to rely on foreign nations, like you just mentioned, and these are not our friends, for energy, what an ignorant thing to do. And it's not just energy, it's going to be It's going to be medications. It's going to be rare earth minerals. It's going to be all these things that we have right here at home, or we could build, or we could produce, or we could manufacture. And why would we put ourselves? I mean, this President Biden is placating to the world and diminishing our global standing just by rejoining the climate agreements. I mean, I could just go down a list,
Sure.
that he's trying to do, and he's killing our standing. That finally, President Trump was able to put America back on top in terms of respect, in terms of trade agreements, moving, the embassy into Jerusalem, all these things he did for America that made us so strong. And now we have a very weak president. We have a president who does not stand for the American people. It is not Make America Great Again. And this Build Back Better is a joke, because we're killing our economy. We're killing our small business. Crisis one after the other that no one wants to take on and no one wants to address realistically.
Yes, ma'am. And oil and gas revenue, especially from the Permian Basin, Southeast New Mexico has been such a huge boom to New Mexico state coffers, to school funds, to road funds. With the proposed and ludicrous transition to this green energy, where we have no exports, where we reduce our GDP, where do people think that money's going to come from?
Yeah, I don't know, and that's a great point. Not only the money, but the 100,000 plus jobs associated with the oil and gas industry just in New Mexico. There's no way to backfill those kind of jobs, and there's the jobs in the green new energy. The jobs that are coming with sun and wind and solar and wind and all that, they don't pay as much as the energy jobs. But that's the other thing. We have two of the biggest producing counties in New Mexico in the country for oil and gas. So we start out with the ban on federal leasing. I mean, that's a huge hit to New Mexico, because this. I mean, 50% of our oil, 60% of our natural gas comes off federal lands. But that's just it. They're running down the road, hair on fire, doing all this stuff with no backup plan, for energy, for jobs. I mean, and it's going to affect every single person in the state of New Mexico, because, like you mentioned, the revenues that we depend on from the industry that supply money to infrastructure, schools, roads, and the services that people actually expect and depend on from government will not be there. And we wrote a letter to the state land commissioner and said, look, this leasing situation is very critical. And in the way that New Mexico is structured with, we have tribal land, public land, private land, state land, it's very checkerboard. And we pointed out that you can't have one without the other, because we have these pipelines and everything. And her response to us was, the oil won't be there forever. I'm paraphrasing. And we need to diversify, putting more money into the film industry and to legalizing marijuana. Well, they got that legalization of marijuana done. And guess what? That is not going to create the backfill of jobs we need. It's not going to create the revenues. I mean, we have the most incompetent people on the planet running the nation and running the state. And that's the sad thing, because our nation is so dear to so many of us, our Constitution, our history, what our founders went through, and what our military, the men and women who have served to give us this freedom. And we've got these people making decisions that have no regard for what makes America truly great. And that's that to me is just heartbreaking.
We face an education battle in this country, and it's an uphill fight, but it's a worthy cause. America is worth saving. One final question, Congresswoman Herrell, and this is kind of a curveball. Okay. So we talked about HR1. We've talked about Speaker Pelosi. We've talked about President Biden and his ludicrous policies and proposals. House Speaker Pelosi announced a select committee to investigate the January 6th Capitol Hill event. In 2018, Speaker Pelosi said, I don't know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be after they find out this is a policy they support. Now, the word uprisings translates to revolt, and I go from there to revolution. Do Speaker Pelosi's and President Biden's words about how we have an obligation to pay for the health care of everyone who's in this country, whether they're documented or not, as we investigate the January 6th event, do Speaker Pelosi's and President Biden's words do they rise to the level of what they're accusing President Trump of in incitement of insurrection?
Yeah, we will not let that go. And again, the hypocrisy, and we talked about this. We've talked about on the floor in committee. They are so focused, laser focused on what happened on January 6th and blaming Trump. I personally believe that it was a setup. I think it got out of control. But I mean, they needed one more reason to impeach him for good. But yet they turned the blind eye to what's happening, in Portland, in Minnesota, in Denver, in other parts of the country, with these riots that are happening, the property damage to private, to state and federal property. Nobody's even talking about that.
Right.
They just turn the blind eye, but they're so laser focused. And sadly, that's all they've got. And so my request to Pelosi would be, stop. We've got two reports or two investigations going on. One, the FBI, one, the Senate passed to do a really deep dive into what happened. She wanted her own. In fact, I voted against the bill because, number one, it was meaningless. It was a detraction. It would only allow an investigation to take place for a few hours on the day of January 6th. Well, if you want to be serious about what's going on and these attacks, then we need to take it back several days and, in fact, several months. It also gave her full subpoena power. I mean, there's a lot more in these bills than people realize, but it was, duplicative. We didn't need it because Senate already passed it, but that's all they've got. I mean, they always run back to January 6th, the insurrection, I'm a white supremacist because I voted, no to certify 6 states. People don't understand. We were never going to do an up or down vote to change the outcome of the election. But I had a constitutional responsibility to point out, hey, these states need to go back and look at how their voting processes went. Because, for instance, Pennsylvania, their Secretary of the State, which is Secretary, it's called something different there, but even equivalent Secretary of State, changed the rules. Well, she doesn't have the authority to do that. All the statutes go and are codified through their state legislature on how elections are run. But she arbitrarily said, hey, we're going to keep taking absentee ballots from election night all the way to Friday. Certainly it won't change the electoral votes, but it would change the outcome for statewide and presidential elections. So, they're not telling the truth about what was going on, but they keep running back to this. And it's kind of like there's 2 things that the Democrats will go back to every single time: climate crisis, Green New Deal, and the insurrection. And
of course,
because that's all they've got. And meanwhile, the American people are saying, hey, how are we going to keep our businesses open? How are we going to stop the flow of illegals at the border? How are we going to protect our energy segment? How are we going to ensure our kids are getting a good, solid education? I mean, Americans are worried about the real life that we live in every single day. And every time there's a question, it goes back to insurrection or climate change. That's all we hear about. But they, and I think that's going to get really played out, because I think voters across the aisle, it's going to start, they will start realizing this is way past politics. This is about people, and who should be having the control are the people. Who's got all the control are Pelosi, Biden, Schumer. I mean, these are not the people that should be making decisions for everyday Americans like New Mexicans, who have a very different view of life and a very different view of politics.
Yes, ma'am. One of the problems, one of the reasons we hear about this climate change all the time is that we have a biased and dishonest media. I said one more question. I guess I lied. Look at me. I'm going to be the President Biden soon. So is that we have a biased and dishonest media that props up people like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who once said, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And here we are 2 years later. But it immobilizes an inflamed and misinformed voting base. What can we do about that? What is this?
That is one of the big tech. I mean, social media, even mainstream media, they're silencing the voices of actual conservatives who, look, I'm not trying to pick fights with people. I'm just trying to talk realities with people. And that is part of the thing that we are having the biggest issue with, because our voices are being silenced, and there really are very few people. And I really appreciate what you're doing, because I think it's going to take a lot of this kind of smaller grassroots, start reaching people on, 10,000 people, 20,000, 50, 100,000 at a time. because we cannot let up on this. They have really got us silenced, and they are canceling the culture. And in fact, I say this often. I go, hey, we can no longer read Dr. Seuss, in classrooms, because that's offensive to somebody. We can't even, I said, no more Mr. Potato Head. It's now just pothead, because
Right.
we don't want to offend anybody. And this is what's sad. And I said this on the House floor. We can't be so quick to try to protect one class of people that we destroy everybody in our way. And when I say destroy everybody, I mean, generations of people who've worked tirelessly to build businesses, to own their own companies or raise their families in our nation. And sadly, unfortunately, because we have indoctrinated and dumbed down the education process, people just believe what they see on social media or Facebook. They don't think to go and get actual facts. And that, I think, is our biggest challenge. It's twofold. One, we've got to educate people on the real truths of what's happening, but then we have to also make these younger folks, these 18 to 30, 40-year-olds understand, facts about our country, our history, our Constitution, free markets, capitalism, what it is they love about America. We need to explain that to them. And sadly, it's a lot of work, but I love that you're doing this show, because this, to me, it's just, we keep having this conversation about truth. And I believe it starts resonating as people start seeing how much things are costing at the store, at the gas pump. The truth is this is going to hurt them in the pocketbook. And that's why we need to be collectively talking about this and getting our messages out there, even though we're being hamstrung by, big tech and by mainstream media.
And certainly we appreciate you on behalf of all of Oil and Gas Workers Association's members. And I would love to say on behalf of all Americans, but not everybody appreciates the truth. Thank you for joining me this morning for our new podcast. Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for fighting, not just for oil and gas workers, but for all Americans.
Well, you're so welcome. It's truly been my greatest honor to be here. I'm so grateful to be in this position, and I love getting back to New Mexico. It's always gratifying to know these are the people that are counting on me, and I'm so thankful to be able to be that voice for them. And we're just going to keep pushing in and pushing hard, and I hope to do your show again, because I know over the next several weeks and months there'll be more and more to talk about.
Certainly. Congresswoman Herrell, thank you again. I know you've got a lot to do for the people of New Mexico and for all of America.
That's right.
Folks, please remember to subscribe to our new YouTube channel. Follow us on all our social media handles. Go to our website, OGWAUSA.com. Oil and Gas Workers Association is fighting for American oil and gas workers. Thanks again, Congresswoman Herrell.
Thank you.